Hi, my name is Shauna Gordon-McKeon, and I'm a software developer, community organizer, and writer. Welcome to my talk on contesting the laws of code. Some may think of laws as rules set in stone, but as most of you know, the law is incredibly changeable. It's changeable in at least two ways. First, the laws themselves can be altered through formal mechanisms, like a bill passed through Congress. And secondly, we can change how they're enforced on the ground. It's tempting to say that only the first of these two mechanisms is legitimate, that we should always enforce all of the laws that exist. But the first mechanism for change actually relies on the second. We don't know what formal changes we ought to make until we've seen people contesting the enforcement of existing laws. We can contest the rules in at least two ways. First, we can disobey. Some would say that all disobedience is bad and ought to be stamped out, but much progress has come about through the practice of civil disobedience, or what the great John Lewis called good trouble. Civil disobedience is the purposeful violation of the law as a way of pulling public attention to the fact that a law is unjust and ought to be changed. Contestation can also be enacted through mercy. That is, someone charged with enforcing the law may be refused to do so. Elinor Ostrom talks about this in her book Governing the Commons when she emphasizes the importance of graduated sanctions. She gives the example of a forest where people were breaking the rules and cutting down extra trees due to economic desperation, and how those who spotted the violations largely kept silent about it out of sympathy. This mercy helps the system to be more robust and more tolerable, and that gives the community the time and mental and emotional energy to engage in fixing any flaws that exist and in tolerating the ones that are just inevitable. So contestation is a vital part of any governance system. And yet the governance systems built into our software are often not contestable. Code automatically enforces itself, leaving little space for disobedience or mercy. And this is ironic since code is so easily changeable. I can flip a bit and change how a piece of software functions a lot faster than we can pass a law and then communicate the new law to everyone who needs to know about it. But the fact that engineers can rewrite code doesn't help all the users on a platform if they want to make changes. There are several levels at which we can contest code and the behaviors enforced by code, from the individual people using the system in unexpected ways to the laws and regulations that limit what organizations building software can legally do. The actions at the base levels tend to impact the ones at higher levels. So here you can see how regulation can affect every level of the pyramid, but user hacks are probably not going to impact how project ownership works. So we can see one way to contest code is through collective ownership. Users can more meaningfully influence their experiences on the platform when they co-own it. And this goes hand in hand with practices of design justice and participatory planning, which bring communities of impacted people to the table and let them decide what the tool should look like. I would love to dive more deeply into all of these levels, but I only have 10 minutes, so I'm going to focus on one specific, relatively low impact way to address the problem, which is through designing software itself to enable contestation. So Kyburn.org is a website that I've built to help communities manage themselves and their resources in flexible, dynamic, non-hierarchical ways. And here's a super quick intro. To start off, communities can have resources. Currently, they can have forums, simple tables of data and documents, but we're going to expand these options as we work with communities with different needs. So for instance, a group of scientists might want to manage literature reviews or meta-analysis. Regardless, communities manage things by setting permissions, which can specify who takes which actions. And these permissions cover every action. Who can make posts, who can edit comments, who can add columns to a table, who can join a community, as well as meta-level actions, such as how leaders get selected. Every time a user takes an action, it's turned into an action object and checked against the existing permission system, which means it's easy to see and reason about and discuss individual actions. For example, you can go look at the history of all actions in a community or all actions targeting a particular resource, such as a specific document or forum. You can search for something that's relevant to you, such as actions you've taken. And maybe you want to ask why someone took an action or why something wasn't approved. And you can start a discussion right there on the actions page. So you can see and discuss and contest actions that people have taken, but what about actions people can't take, permissions they don't have? Most sites make these actions invisible. There'll be a bit of code somewhere saying, hey, if the user has this permission, then show the button or icon, and if the user doesn't have the permission, hide it. It's not always the case. For example, when Twitter recently gave users the ability to turn off replies, they showed a grayed out icon, which when you click on it tells you that you can't take the action. And this is because people were expecting to be able to take the action. So they wanted to show people that they couldn't this time. But more often, users simply never see the interface. There's people on Twitter staff that have the ability to delete other people's tweets, for instance, but you don't see a grayed out delete tweet button when you look at someone else's tweet. So this design makes it very difficult to know what kinds of actions are possible and to contest your right to take those actions. And Kyburn used this design for a while in part because that's just how it's usually done. But now we're trying something different. Kyburn now shows all actions, even if the user doesn't have the right to take them. If anyone can do it, you can see it. Kyburn also gives users an interface for proposing an action, even if they don't have permission to do it. And this proposal is a way of contesting the system, of saying, I disagree with the rules that say I can't do this, even if it's a very narrow disagreement, like you just want an exception for this one thing. When someone who doesn't have permission proposes an action, they're required to write a little note explaining the context and their motivation. Now, the system can be misused. Someone could spam the community with endless pointless proposals, but the hope is that communities will use existing mechanisms of self-governance to try and disincentivize that behavior. It's also worth noting that even if you have permission to take the action, you can still just propose it. So it's a way of getting feedback and community buy-in before actually making a change. And as with other actions, once this is done, you can have a whole discussion. Now, this is not as far as we could go. We could let anyone take an action even if they don't have permission. And this is really antithetical to how we think about digital platform, but it's not far off from how laws work in real life. So for example, you're not allowed to drive junk, but you can still do it. If we could somehow magically flip a switch or a bit and stop everyone from driving drunk, we would probably do it. But the fact remains that most human societies, or all human societies, mostly have laws that can be violated. So maybe there's a value in a digital platform that works similarly. This is not something we've currently implemented in Kyburn, and if we did, it would probably be something really customizable and limitable by the community, but I'm really interested to get other people's thoughts on this approach. Now, you can use Kyburn's action and permission system or something like it to make a lot of different things contestable. Not just contestable either, but subject to formal rules determined by the community. So both elements of changing the law, the informal contestation and the formal change element going in hand. Take the example of a newsfeed. The order of items in a newsfeed is determined by an algorithm. This could be a simple chronological algorithm posting the newest things first, but on high volume feeds, you might want to do something different. Facebook and Twitter use secret proprietary algorithms to decide what you see, but there's no reason that it has to be secret, and there's no reason that Facebook's engineers or designers, or the engineers or designers in general, should get to decide what an algorithm is, other than in the case of Facebook or Twitter, the desire for profit. So this is a mock-up of what a community-controlled news algorithm could look like. The community can decide what factors to take into consideration and what weights they should have. But in order for this to work, there needs to be space for members of the community to propose changes, to contest the configuration, because even when it's community controlled, it'll still sometimes get things wrong, and we need to have a way to contest that. This is all obviously a lot to ask of people. It requires an engagement with the practice of governance that most people aren't prepared for. But I think we spent too long as a society delegating our decisions to other people. We let Facebook and Apple designers tell us how we should use technology, and we let elected representatives choose our policies for us, instead of engaging in the messy work of negotiation and compromise ourselves. Governance seems intimidating because we're all so out of practice, and also because we have so much else on our plates. Many of us live precarious lives, which means we don't have the time or the energy to make these kinds of decisions or engage in these kinds of negotiations. And the people that we have to delegate power to benefit from that. So this kind of work can't just be about software, even though that's been the focus of my talk. We need to create the conditions where people have the energy and desire and resources to participate in governance at all levels, from policy to ownership to participatory planning to design to everyday use. And I hope that this kind of design experimentation can be a small part of that. If you're interested in learning more about Kyburn, I'm doing a second talk on Friday at 9:45 Eastern Time. The session is called Online Communities, Engineering Self-Governing Online Commons. You can also reach out to me directly at this email. If you have feedback for me, thoughts, I would love to hear them. You're also very welcome to try out the site at kyburn.org. And we're actively looking for communities to beta test with. So if you've got a community or project you think might be a good fit for the site, please especially reach out. You can see these slides at the link above. You can see the GitHub organization for the project at the link above. And finally, if you're interested, I have a newsletter on the intersection of technology and governance where I talk a lot about this kind of stuff. So if you like this talk, you'll probably like that. Thanks for watching.